Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Scott Harris. I'm director of the James Monroe Museum, and it is my great pleasure to welcome you, to welcome you to the museum's first Monroe Presidential Bicentennial related event of 2017. We wanted to be sure we qualified that very specifically. At the outset, I would like to acknowledge the generous support of our public programs that are provided by a variety of sponsors here in our local community. You'll find the names of them on the schedule cards for our program activities this year for the first half of the year. But I do want to acknowledge the H. Stewart Jones Charitable Trust, the Paul and Jane Jones Trust with Walter Jervis Sheffield as the trustee, the Fredericksburg Savings Charitable Foundation, the James Monroe Memorial Foundation, and the Friends of the James Monroe Museum. These organizations, these folks make all of the museum's public programs possible. We're very grateful for that. I'd also like to recognize the excellent work of staff members of the James Monroe Museum, my colleagues, who include our public programs coordinator, Linda Allen, and her assistant in this endeavor, Pat Bachman, from our guide staff. They are really the organizers of this event. So if it goes well, I get all the credit. If it goes badly, it was their fault. So that's how we do things. Also, our curator, Jared Kearney, as well as our office and store manager, Tracy DeBernard. They are all here this evening, have had a lot to do with making this event possible. And we're ably assisted by Tom Mountcastle and Kyle Krupa of the UMW AV staff, who are facilitating both the audio and the video as well as the live streaming. So would you please join me in applauding our sponsors and our staff members. This evening's program has several coincidental elements that made it come together that we try to capitalize on. First, today is President's Day. Now, many of you probably remember that the holiday, the federal holiday, is actually George Washington's birthday. But by sort of a popular movement that's emerged over the last 50 years or so, we have come to call it President's Day, and that's actually very appropriate for us because we are bringing presidents together. The other coincidence is that 2017 does mark the bicentennial of the start of the presidential administration of James Monroe. And so for the next 8 years, the James Monroe Museum, as well as other institutions that are dedicated to the Monroe legacy around the Commonwealth of Virginia, will be presenting an array of public programs and exhibits and other initiatives that highlight some of the major themes and the historic milestones associated with our nation's 5th president. The next event in this series from our museum will occur next month on March 4th with a recreation of the inauguration of James Monroe in front of this building, 200 years to the day, the hour even, after the original ceremony. So we do hope you'll be able to join us for that. It will be a truly one-of-a-kind event, and it will also feature the United States Marine Corps Historical Company, the Old Guard Fifes and Drums from the 3rd U.S. Infantry, and a number of other costumed interpretive folks, including James and Dolly Madison, James and Elizabeth Monroe, and Chief Justice John Marshall. So we're very pleased to be able to present that. The third coincidence that suggested this program tonight is the fact that Dr. Troy Paino, who will be inaugurated as the 10th, or will be inaugurated as the 10th president of the University of Mary Washington on April 21st of this year, just a very short time from now. And the most striking coincidence, really, of all, is that these two men, so widely separated in time and by cultural circumstance from each other, articulated remarkably similar philosophies on the importance of liberal arts education as the basis for a civically responsible electorate. And so by bringing these various threads together, we hope to have, if you will, a tapestry of discussion and exploration. Through the process of imagination, yours, and historical interpretation, President James Monroe will take his place shortly on this stage here in his namesake building to reflect upon his life and career and to share with us his perspectives on education and on representative democracy. He will be joined by President Paino, whose views on the same subjects are not only relevant to our general society, but also animate his vision for our university. James Monroe was born in Westmoreland County, Virginia on April 28, 1758. While still a teenager, he left his studies at the College of William and Mary to join the Continental Army. He fought in several battles of the Revolutionary War, including the Battle of Trenton, where he was wounded. He rose in rank from lieutenant to lieutenant colonel, and by war's end was praised by George Washington as a, quote, brave, active, and sensible officer. Monroe viewed the American Revolution as a transformational experience not only for himself, but for the world at large. Imbued with the principles and promise of representative democracy, he compiled a career as a state and federal legislator, diplomat, governor of Virginia, cabinet secretary, and president. He played decisive roles in the ratification of the United States Constitution, the Louisiana Purchase, and the Missouri Compromise. His most famous legacy, the Monroe Doctrine, which committed the United States to opposing European intervention in the affairs of the Western Hemisphere, was a cornerstone of American foreign policy well into the 20th century. And even into this century, the doctrine is still referenced in debate across the political spectrum. Now, I should also say that being here in the city of Fredericksburg, many of whose residents are joining us tonight, I can't help but point out that they feel the most proud accomplishment of James Monroe in his political career was his service on the Common Council here in the city. So we do want to acknowledge that too. Troy D. Paino was born in Indianapolis, Indiana on December 28, 1962. He took office as the 10th president of the University of Mary Washington on July 1st, 2016. He will be formally inaugurated on April 21st of this year. Dr. Paino is deeply committed to Mary Washington's public, liberal arts and sciences mission of providing academic excellence and social uplift in equal measure. Prior to coming to UMW, he served for 6 years as president of Truman State University in Kirksville, Missouri, or Missouri. Previously, he was Truman State's provost and vice president for academic affairs, and he also served as dean of Winona State University's College of Liberal Arts. Dr. Paino earned doctoral and master's degrees in American Studies from Michigan State University and holds a Juris Doctorate from Indiana University and a bachelor's degree in History and Philosophy from Evangel University. His teaching and scholarly interests include American higher education, 20th century cultural and social history, and American legal history. He has written extensively on the history of American sports and published the book, The Social History of the United States, 1960s, in 2008. Dr. Paino is a member of the Association of American Colleges and Universities President's Trust for Liberal Education and America's Promise. He is president of the Council of Public Liberal Arts Colleges. Now, before I welcome these gentlemen to the stage, I was remiss in reminding everyone to turn off their cell phones, or to silence them. So I've seen some movement there. I hope we will finish off with that. We appreciate it. And now would you please welcome with me to the stage President James Monroe and President Troy Paino. Mr. President? Oh. Thank you, sir, for being with us. Well, it is a pleasure to have both of you gentlemen here, and we hope it will be an enlightening discussion for our audience, both here and online, and for yourselves as well. And I would like to see if I might get an opening statement from each of you, and I'll start, President Monroe, with you. Welcome back to Fredericksburg.
Thank you, sir.
And to the 21st century. We won't get into details about how we managed to do that. At this time, 200 years ago, you were just weeks away from your first inauguration. What were your hopes for your administration?
Some of the more important matters of concern for me were national unity, rebuilding American defense, education, and the well-being of the nation itself, coming together of the people, and also imbuing in those goals also the spirit of the American Revolution, because the vigor, wisdom, and valor shown by our compatriots during the war led to the founding of this nation. And those ideals have been part and parcel of my career, and I have felt that they have helped continue the nation in its form of Republican government.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
President Paino, in 2 months and 1 day, as we observed, yes, 2 months and 1 day, you will be inaugurated as the 10th president of the University of Mary Washington. At the risk of preempting your inaugural address, would you share some of your hopes for your administration?
2 months and 1 day. I guess that reminds me I should get working on my speech. Well, thank you, first of all, for this invitation. It's certainly an honor to be here with President Monroe and talk about the importance of public education generally, public higher education more particularly, and what's near and dear to my heart, certainly public liberal arts education and how important that is for our democracy. I think what people will hear in a month, 2 months and a day from me is that Mary Washington's future is very much tied to its past. That many of the enduring values that we hold true here, that really from our very founding back in 1908, and have stayed with us through our various evolution and relationship with the University of Virginia and then ultimate independence now some almost 50 years ago, it is still going to be who we are in the future, but we're going to adapt it to very 21st century realities. And just like President Monroe talked about his administration and responding to some of those very immediate needs, national unity and the like, I want us to respond to our very immediate needs. And so that's what we're going to be talking a lot about in 2 months and a day, is how Mary Washington and its public liberal arts mission is relevant today and responding to the very challenges that we're facing in our republic today.
Thank you. We are going to start with several questions that have been previously prepared that get at sort of the essence of the themes that we hope to explore this evening. As you've come in, hopefully those of you in the audience will have used the question cards that you were provided, and we'll return those to our staff so that we might get some of the audience questions up before these gentlemen as well. And we'll remind you that at the end of this program, those in attendance here will have a chance to meet with the presidents at our reception afterward. But I would like to start with the areas of education and democracy. And as we said, there's been some remarkable alignment between the writings of you two gentlemen who were obviously in very different circumstances and very different times. And I think that'll be evident as we get into these. President Monroe, in 1817, you wrote, quote, "Nothing is more interesting to my own mind, and nothing can be more important to our common country than the cultivation of science and liberal literature. The principal support of a free government is to be derived from the sound morals and intelligence of the people, and the more extensive the means of education, the more confidently we may rely upon the preservation of our liberties." Can you elaborate on that, including how your own education and your experiences shaped your views on that, what you said, the preservation of our public liberties?
Very good point. The earliest memories of my education, Campbelltown Academy in Westmoreland County, were involving science, mathematics, the Romance languages, and from there I launched into my time at the College of William and Mary in Virginia, in Williamsburg. I was placed in the upper school at that time. I thought I was prepared for that opportunity, and I was woefully unprepared for the opportunity, and I suffered because of it. It led to a break in the session where I had to reevaluate my methods of study and application of myself to the endeavors before me, and I took the opportunity to engage in a more thorough study of those topics that I was lacking background in, and pursued that with vigor so that when the session resumed, I was prepared to basically work with my fellow students in a more respectable atmosphere and work well with them. Those values of hard education were instilled in me by my Campbelltown Academy instructor, Archibald Campbell, and my parents. I also want to point out the value of education was very important prior to my leaving for William and Mary, because in 1765, during the Stamp Act affair that was occurring in the country, right after that incident in 1766, my father and another member of the family were very involved with the Leedstown or Westmoreland resolves. That was a response by the citizens of Westmoreland County against the incursions by the British government into representation, taxation without representation, and the concerns of part of the county citizens. My family was very involved in that, and that helped fuel the need to know more. And so going to Williamsburg and going into this hotbed of rebellion where you had the only institution of higher learning in the Commonwealth of Virginia at that time, and also having the Virginia Assembly meeting there in the colonial capital, a stone's throw away from each other. Students were involved not only with their scholarly studies, but also this exposure to this great discord between the monarchy and also between the citizens of the colony that were concerned about their liberties and which were at stake. So that was fuel for the fire for me in terms of education. And one thing about education, the more education one accrues, it leads to aspiration, and aspiration leads to a desire to become ambitious and to pursue other opportunities. So it's a process through which one evolves, and it's a lifelong. And as a matter of fact, education is the #1 priority within a Republican form of government, and at least in my opinion.
Thank you. President Paino, writing somewhat later in 2014, you wrote in an article that on liberal arts universities to speak of them as existing to sustain democracy by preparing informed, engaged, open-minded, and socially responsible people committed to the common good. Liberal democracies, you said, cannot survive without a liberally educated middle class. Why is a liberally educated middle class so vital to a healthy democracy?
Well, you know, I think certainly one of the cornerstones of a liberal arts education is the development of a free and independent mind, to be a critical thinker, to think for oneself. And I believe it's a cornerstone of our democracy because it's basically our kind of last line of defense against authoritarianism. That we live in a country where the citizens ultimately are the ones who are the deciders and can hold those who are in the seats of power responsible. And in order to do that, you have to have people who have independent minds, who have developed their higher order thinking skills, know when someone is not telling them the truth, can break down an argument, can think for themselves, can ask questions whether or not there's evidence to support the argument that's being made, and to have a dialogue with those who are governing us. And so I think it's critically important that we think of the public purpose of education. I think President Monroe would be disheartened to know that since his time, increasingly, we have viewed education as a private good instead of a public good. And I think that if we are going to continue to have a vibrant representative democracy, it's critically important to refocus our energies around that public good of developing not only those people who can go out and get jobs, but also people who can think of themselves, but also who are socially responsible and, as I mentioned in my quote, engaged citizens. And for Mary Washington, that's one of the things that I hope as we move forward, we build on our tradition of getting students out in the communities, socially engaged, working on social problems, learning by doing. That's a fundamental important part of a liberal arts education in my mind.
Thank you. Mr. Monroe, civic responsibility is an area that we, again, look to your comments of another age different from our own and see so many interesting parallels in the society in which we live. And we go back to 1803 when you made the following statement, quote, "The responsibility of public servants, however well provided for by the Constitution, becomes vain and useless if the people in general are not competent judges in the course of the administration of all the questions which it involves. If it was wise, manly, and patriotic in us to establish free government, it is equally incumbent on us to attend to the necessary means of its preservation." Can you elaborate somewhat on what you believe the responsibilities of citizens are in a republic? such
Yes,
as ours?
I believe wholeheartedly that all citizens, it is their obligation to know all the principles of Republican government, the duties as citizens and the duties of their representatives. For not having that knowledge, they're not able to competently judge what's going on. That possibly leads to either corruption or dereliction of duty or the non-performance of one's elected representatives. And in so doing, and having an informed citizenry, whether you're a representative or just someone being served by that representative, I think that puts one on an equal footing and an opportunity to make sure that things happen. Very important for me is that that provides the opportunity for either, for non-performance of work or accomplishments as elected representative, either have censure or some other form of reprimand. And I think that's a way to discourage abuse of power. So civic responsibility, I believe, is imperative to all. And again, it's part and parcel of a in our instance, we're a constitutional democratic republic. We have, as you all perhaps know, I hope we all know, that in a republic we're governed by popular sovereignty, the ability to govern oneself. We're a democracy where we have elected representatives who we appoint to represent us, and then we have a constitution. So the constitution provides the framework by which we create laws by which the elected representatives enact those laws. And that's the basis of this country. So civic responsibility becomes part of all of this. And a republic which is the antithesis of a monarchy. And as you all know, we worked our way away from a monarchy a long time ago. And
You had something to do with that, too.
well, you're most kind. There were many people involved, and I played a small role, but thank you. Thank you, sir.
How's the bullet in your shoulder, by the way?
It's still there. Thank you. Thank you, sir.
I think it should be pointed out, too, that as a member of the United States Senate, Mr. Monroe advocated for a while unsuccessfully to have the journals of the Senate made no longer secret but open to the public. We have something now called C-SPAN that you would probably find very interesting. You may have anticipated that by, well, I know, we'll talk about it later. We'll try and cover that one. Dr. Paino, when you were introduced to the UMW community last February in our university center, you said something somewhat similar to President Monroe's observation about the responsibility of citizens in our republic. Quote, what we really are about here at Mary Washington, and what really attracted me, was that we produce young people who have a servant's heart, who become passionate about something and want to improve the world, and who want to be fully engaged in their communities and want to advance our democracy in a positive way. And to me, that's why I do this work. Can you share something of your vision about how our university will sustain and hopefully increase the cultivation of civic-minded graduates?
Yeah. Well, thank you for the opportunity, because it is, I think, an important part of not only Mary Washington's past, but certainly its future. To me, universities like Mary Washington are tributaries to society. They're not islands. Sometimes the metaphor is an ivory tower. And I know even here in Fredericksburg, I've heard it described as the college up on the hill, and sometimes people have been critical that many of the buildings are inward-looking, and that that there's greenery around that gives it a sense of sort of being an enclave from society. When in fact its mission, both from its very beginning and on through the 20th century and now into the 21st century, is that we are here to serve. And we are here to prepare young people who are going to go out and serve in their communities. That this is basically the foundation of our democracy and our republics and our communities, to have those individuals who understand their role, their civic responsibility. So I think it's critically important that we do even more at Mary Washington to get our students out off of the campus into the community. We have programs, historic preservation certainly being one of them, that has the great advantage of using Fredericksburg as a learning laboratory. But that's only the beginning of opportunities in all the various disciplines here at Mary Washington to get our students out and involved. And one of the wonderful things in thinking about the future is and what attracted me here is our great strategic location. So close to the nation's capital, so close to the Commonwealth's capital. right here really where we see, we're kind of at a cross-section where we see a lot of the tensions and the changes in our society, that we can get our students out and engaged and involved in the very problems that we're going to have to solve if our republic's going to survive. So to me, that's a critically, if not the most important part of our mission, is preparing civically engaged citizens.
A liberal arts education, hopefully fostering a heightened awareness of civic responsibility, will in many cases, hopefully, lead to people assuming leadership positions in their communities, in our government, in other walks of life, or at the very least being good stewards of those who are leaders and good critiquers of them. I wonder if we might look a bit at leadership, and President Monroe, we go to your annual message to Congress on December 2nd, 1823, one that might be particularly memorable to you, and is the one that contained the doctrine that bears your name. We decided to call it the Monroe Doctrine later. You made the following observation about public leaders, quote, "Those who are engaged in the management of public affairs are more subject to excitement and to be led astray by their particular interests and passions than the great body of our constituents. To the people, every department of the government and every individual in each are responsible." What more can you say here about the qualities that public leaders should possess as they function within our society?
Well, I believe that a moral and good character are very important in a leadership capacity to undertake the role of representative government. We're fostering an atmosphere in which people are engaged, from our farmers to our merchants to our bankers to people involved in creative arts, to do things to benefit the nation, and having a ground by which many people are involved in making this experiment work. We need for people to come forward and show their ability to help guide. And I think that, as we mentioned before, with education and civic responsibility, those are breeding grounds for aspiration to take on leadership roles. I saw a lot of that during my military career in the Continental Army and in subsequent commands with the Virginia Militia and under Thomas Jefferson as well. I was given opportunities to go forward and take on the responsibilities that were of immense importance to the young nation, the fledgling nation at the time, and also later on the Commonwealth of Virginia. And that is one of the most wonderful things about a representative government and democracy and republic in itself, in that we have these freedoms to expand our horizons and to take leadership positions to get things done. And the common man on up can have access to those possibilities, and that's the great thing about the United States of America. So from someone from my humble background to where I am and have served, I hope that my examples have provided some inspiration to others too. I've been very fortunate by those opportunities, and those opportunities, again, I believe are ones to encourage others to follow suit, and to use good judgment and good character and moral sound values to make decisions on the part of the populace. Those are important to me.
It may interest you to know, sir, that no occupant of the presidency since your time has had as many public service jobs coming into that office as yourself. So,
thank you,
for
sir.
what that is worth.
Well, thank you,
it's
sir.
worth a lot. Dr. Paino, last year you provided a vivid explanation of your leadership goals as UMW's president when you stated, quote, "I do not want to be president at a place where I am disconnected. I want to be right down there in the mud and the muck with all of you as we grapple with some of the most serious challenges facing this country." What else would you like to say about the mud and the muck of leadership?
Well, I have a very different view of leadership, I suppose, than most, and it's not the stereotypical. Many times people think of leaders They think of the general, or they think of the president, someone with the title, or maybe the stature, maybe the presence when they walk into the room, that, oh, there's a leader. I think of leaders as those individuals who are affecting positive change. And those are oftentimes people who aren't maybe labeled traditionally as leaders by title or by position, but they're the ones who are willing to take responsibility and get involved and take that step. And I see this certainly among our students here at Mary Washington, students who are eager to bring about change and get involved and make sacrifices to be those public servants that we so desperately need. And so for me, I think a leader should have a servant's heart. And I think that you should be there, right there, shoulder to shoulder with others who are trying to bring about positive change, whether it's for the university or for the country. And so that's what I essentially mean by that, is that I went into this line of work because I care deeply about the role of education, certainly in the life of our republic, but also its transformative power for the individual students, and trying to produce people of good, strong moral character who are going to try and help others and to try and improve this world. That's what I care deeply about. If I'm the president of a university and I'm sitting in my office and I have very little contact with those very students who are trying to develop and turn into leaders and public servants, I become very disconnected from our mission. And when you become disconnected from the mission and the work of your institution, you start making bad decisions. You start making decisions for the wrong reasons, not because you're a bad person, but you no longer are engaged in the very work that makes this place go. So when I made that statement, it was basically for me to send the message to both the students, but certainly our faculty and staff, that I want to be a president who is right there working with us side by side, listening, certainly bringing my own ideas to bear, but really being a part of this collective effort.
Well, thank you. I have the opportunity now to share some of the questions from our audience that we have collected, and I thank Linda for bringing those down. If you will bear with me as I make sure I can navigate everybody's penmanship. We have a real problem with cursive these days in our society, and it's going to make it harder to read what people like you had to write a long time ago.
I'll explain why at the break.
Yeah, well, good, very good, yes. And these are, as from what I can tell, largely directed to both of you, and so we'll tackle them if we could between you. And then looks like at least one is primarily one each is a question primarily to you individually, but most of them are to both of you. So let's jump right in with let's start with Dr. Paino this time. Work our way back since we've been giving you pride of place here because of your vintage. But if we can go in the reverse order for a moment. What are your views about the role of a free press in our republic?
Well, I talked about, in my mind, public education and public higher education, public liberal arts education being a pillar of our republic. I feel like a free and open press is another pillar of our representative democracy, and we need to defend it. Not only is our Constitution, our First Amendment, but it also is important, just like education is, to have a free-thinking, independent electorate. It's also important to have an informed electorate and to have a press that is not beholden to government or those in power, who have that freedom to scrutinize and report on the ongoing work of those in power is critically important for citizens to make the right decisions. So for us to sort of shine the light, if you will, we need a free and open press. And so I jokingly said last night at a forum, I am not a president who is going to declare the media the enemy. And that doesn't mean that the media always gets it right. And that doesn't mean, and there's sometimes, certainly in the 21st century, I feel bad about the quality of journalism in some of our major outlets. With that being said, it is still critically important to have a press that is free and open, that plays a critical role in educating our citizenry. And so I believe that right next to the value of education is the value of a free and open press.
President Monroe, you lived in the era in which, really in this country, the rise of very partisan newspapers as organs of different party thought emerged, the era of the Alien and Sedition Acts that occurred. what's your perspective on the free press and what it meant really in many ways to the foundation of the form of government that we have enjoyed?
Well, first off, I'd like to acknowledge President Paino's comments. I do agree with him about the freedom of the press. And in my time, it was, especially during my presidency, I began a series of presidential tours to acquaint my constituency with myself. I understand in your time it may be somewhat different, but at my time it was rare for a president to make face-to-face contact with the person who supported him. And during 18, 19, I undertook a series of tours in the northern states to principally view our coastal defenses and our military installations of great concern about national security and making those better places to protect our nation. But also, I came well to know during my addresses with the people who came out to visit with me. I was very surprised by the turnout of not only the citizenry but also the press to cover my my visits to communities. And sometimes there were very large gatherings, as in Boston, 40,000 or plus individuals will come out and gather with me. So I use the opportunities to engage with them about my goals during my tenure as your president. Again, those things of national security, national unity, westward expansion, education, and to acquaint people with me. And that was very, very important during those tours. And I understand that during Jackson's, our President Jackson's administration, that he has used his staff have used my forays into visiting the public as a mainstay of forming what they call a political campaign. You may be more familiar with campaigns in your time. Also,
a bit.
Also, important to point out that most of you may know that I was not a fan of the Constitution without a Bill of Rights. And the Bill of Rights safeguards this freedom that we talked about. And also the fact that I am not a fan of political parties. Neither was our founding president, George Washington. Often people will associate me with being a Republican. That's in a lowercase r for Republican, not as in a party. We're all about a decentralized government because there's great fear that there'll be too much control at the national level and there's not enough state control. So I am not, I fear political parties will be the ruin of our nation. I know that President Jackson will disagree with you on that subject, but I think that I'm sort of going off on a random tangent there about political parties, but I want to make sure that I made that statement about my connection to parties and such. Thank you, sir.
No, you can be forgiven, sir. You were born in 1758, and you tend to go on sometimes. That's all right. I might also add, too, that in that northern tour of which you spoke and the role of the press, one of the newspapers provided what became really a catchphrase for your presidency, commenting on the era of good feelings
exactly.
that your tour produced.
The Boston newspaper did that.
That
so
they got, and they got right. Oh, and more coming up, more all the time. I'm sorry? Okay, well, we may have to pick up the pace a little bit here.
Certainly.
Next question here, and I will just throw it up and see which one of you wants to tackle it first. Again, not exactly a simple one. Freedom of religion. What does that mean to you, especially in the context of as we're speaking, of our society?
Well, during, as you know, here in Fredericksburg, the Statue of Religious Freedom was undertaken by Thomas Jefferson, a mentor of mine. It is a reflection on that is an important part of what I have been trying to get across to the American public, recognition of religious freedom here in this country, the Bill of Rights as well. I think that's an important component of why this nation was founded, religious freedom. I think that pretty much sums up my feelings on that. I am pretty adamant about allowing complete tolerance for our religious faith in this nation. Sir?
I think it's completely tied to our earlier conversation about the value of the liberal arts. I believe that sort of freedom of religion is essentially as much of the First Amendment is about is sort of freedom of consciousness, freedom to believe as you will, without governmental interference. And to me, that's a precursor for all of our other freedoms. And so it's our independence as individuals to develop our own belief systems, whether they're faith-based or not. That is up to the individual, up to the person. And I think that's critically important, and maybe even more important in the 21st century as we've become an increasingly pluralistic society since your time, is that we have to be vigilant in the defense of that freedom for people to believe according to their own conscience. And that certainly includes religious belief.
Forgive me as I'm sort of sorting through here and making sure I can try and keep some balance with the nature of the question. And I applaud our audience for putting some real thought into these. President Monroe, with your interpretation of, and bear with me, we're going to have to get into a little bit of science here that may strain your credulity. We've come a long way in many positive ways in our time. We've also achieved levels of potential destruction that are almost biblical. In fact, they are biblical from your perspective, probably, in terms of what it could do to the extinguishing of our society. So with that as an understanding that we have acquired immense power potentially to destroy ourselves, with your interpretation of national security, how would you define a hostile act against the United States, given that those countries, you know, I'm sorry, I'm not sure I can quite frame this question in the way that would make sense within President Monroe's context. So let me back off of that one for a moment, and as we go along, I might see if I might be able to put that one in a little better perspective. Let me jump over to Dr. Paino for a moment. This is live television, folks, so we're working
that
with
question was above my pay grade.
Okay, yeah, that one. I'm going to have to rethink that as we go along. With the current leadership differences in our country, Dr. Paino, between Democrats and Republican parties, I think you might also say between liberal, conservative, and many gradations in between, how do you remain steady, as it says here, in teaching tomorrow's leaders on what is right and wrong in basic leadership principles? I guess, how do you sort of define the moral compass?
That's a great question. It's very hard, and another reality of the 21st century, President Monroe, is sort of we live in a digital universe where our students are being bombarded with information and messages constantly, and trying to get a clear sense and develop a worldview with this information that's coming in at them from all angles at all times is very difficult. And we also are living in an age, and certainly we've had times in our history not unlike this, where we're very polarized. And we recently did a climate survey here at Mary Washington. And what's interesting is that probably the thing that divides people the most right now, and certainly our students, but I would say of our electorate as well, is not race, it's not class, it's not religion, it's political party, going to your earlier point. Those who are less likely to engage in conversation and talk with one another has more to do with whether or not you associate yourself as a D or an R than it does from where you're from, what your belief system is, what your economic background is, that we have entered into an era where we are having a challenge to talk to one another about critically important issues, largely around our political affiliation and where our political ideology is. So this is a real challenge because Mary Washington, we want to reflect all of the diversity of our democracy, because if we're going to prepare that next generation of leaders, I think it's critically important that we reflect the pluralism and the various ideology. But how do we get our students to engage in meaningful dialogue with those they disagree? And right now, another thing that you would not be familiar with if you went to cable television, and I do this sometimes just for fun, when there's a controversial issue being discussed, I will flip back and forth between MSNBC, I know this means nothing to you, and Fox News. And you would believe that you are on two different planets in the way they are talking about the very same topic. So I think this is not only is this hard for the individual to try and figure out, make their sense and develop a worldview, but I think it's also a threat to our republic that we are so polarized right now, and we're having a hard time figuring out how to get people together and have conversations with one another with mutual respect. It's a real challenge.
This question was addressed specifically to Dr. Paino, but I think I'm going to try it out on both of you because I think that there's the opportunity to play off your different perspectives. When one is trying to lead or make changes, what is or how do you find the balance between listening to new and diverse perspectives and speaking out and acting? So in striking that balance between the gathering of information and informing your perspective and then taking decisive action, how do you view that, Mr. Monroe, particularly given your varied careers at different levels of government and diplomacy particularly, too?
Well, for example, during the presidential tours I undertook that I mentioned earlier, those opportunities to speak to the public were mainly listening sessions as well as speaking engagements. So I spent a lot of time listening to what the constituents wanted to tell me about their issues and then responding in turn, and not out of anger, but with an informed background. And that's very important in all the roles I undertake, whether it's with the cabinet secretaries, meeting with Congress, and listening to them about those things that trouble them. And in order to enact the things we want to progress the nation forward. So listening, active listening, is one of the keynote parts of my discipline of leading the country.
If I may go back a little earlier in your career, you were in a position as a diplomatic representative to France in which you were presented with an opportunity that exceeded your instructions, namely the offer of the acquisition of the whole of the Louisiana territory when you were sent there really to just help negotiate the purchase of New Orleans. What lay behind your feelings in terms of taking what was, by almost any measure, a pretty big leap beyond your charter?
Well, very important to me is to recognize opportunities, as President Pino is pointing out, areas of, looking for areas of change to benefit in a progressive way the progress of our society. That was an opportunity to expand our country. It is an immediate opportunity that, in dealing with the complications of my time when communication from one continent to another took about a month, by ship, if you were lucky and the weather was on your side, there was an opportunity that had to be undertaken, and it felt like in the best interest of our nation to sign that agreement and to undertake the purchase of Louisiana. So, in one regard, yes, I could be said to have exceeded my authority, but without pursuing that opportunity and writing back to the other side of the world and waiting for a response, I think the opportunity would have been surely lost. And I think it benefited the nation.
We've made pretty good use of it, I think.
Thank you.
And including where some of your career was before coming here, that section of the country. Dr. Pino, for you, in a more contemporary time frame, obviously, with our institution, as you look ahead, where is that balance between research and listening and then acting?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I couldn't imagine the daunting responsibility of trying to lead a country and make those decisions. But even at a university, when you come in new to a place, I think it's wise to spend most of your time in listening mode and trying to learn the place, and not just at a superficial level, but really at a deep level. And that takes deep listening, quite honestly. And sometimes it takes not only listening to what they're saying, but really also what they're meaning, and having a lot of versions of the same story come at you. And so I spent most of my 6 months here doing exactly what President Monroe did, and that is getting out on campus and listening, whether it was students, staff, faculty, but also listening to alums and those who've worked here in the past and could tell the story, could tell the history. People like Bill Crawley, who actually wrote the history. It's good to listen to these people who've been around, who can tell you, give you a sense of the place, where you start to feel it as opposed to just sort of intellectualize it. So that's what I've done most of my time here in the first 7.5 months. The other reality of a university is that there's no shortage of great ideas. There are a lot of really smart people at universities. And so you get here and you get inundated with a lot of things you can do. But as a leader, I think the question is exactly right. You can't do all things. You have to gain focus at some point in time. Because if you try to do too many things, and I've seen a lot of strategic plans that suffer from this, you end up dying of your own weight trying to do too much at once. And so really trying to get a sense of where the energy is, where the possibilities are, and then tie that back to, as I said earlier, what are those enduring values that make this place really unique and special? And I'll just give you one example for Mary Washington that excites me. When you think about our very founding in 1908, what were we set up as? We were set up as a normal school. And what was a normal school? It was to prepare the next generation of teachers or teachers. This was happening at a critical time in American history during the Progressive era, when we were going through a lot of change that was really sort of fraying our communities. Urbanization, immigration, all of these things, industrialization, maybe different forces of change than what we're experiencing now, but similar. And the reason why this school was set up was to prepare women who would go out into public schools and to prepare the next generation of citizens. It was really about civic engagement, preparing citizens. And to me, that's an exciting thing because you think about where are we right now and what is our responsibility. It's also exciting because if you compare where we are in the 21st century to where we were when President Monroe was president, what we mean by citizen is a lot broader, right? At that time, white men who owned property, and now we're in a generation where, we really think very broadly, not only from men and women, but also in terms of those regardless of race. As long as you are a citizen, you have the full benefits of citizenship. And I think of, in 1908, women did not have the right to vote. But yet this is the very school that put women at the center of civic life by making them teachers with the responsibility of preparing the next generation of citizens and leaders for our democracy. You can't tell me that Mary Washington's very presence didn't have something to do with expanding the rights of citizenship to women by putting them on the front lines of what it means to be a representative democracy. So that excites me. And I sit here in 2017 that we're right back playing that role in terms of expanding what we mean by citizenship, empowering people with all of the rights and privileges of citizenship, but also making sure that we instill those critical responsibilities of citizenship in order to bring the nation together. We're not only producing individuals, empowering the individual, we're also thinking what holds us together as a country. And I feel that we need that now more than ever, just like we did back in 1908. So that's exciting to me. So when I hear that story about our past and I tie it to where we are, it's like, okay, we've got something. This is who we are, and this is what we're going to focus on moving forward.
It's interesting you took that historical perspective of the founding of this university. I can go a little further back with Mr. Monroe's observations on education for women in 1819, I believe.
Exactly.
And the circumstance of that was?
Another presidential tour, an opportunity to engage the citizenry of Nashville and talk to them about expanding opportunities for women in education. And it seems like things have progressed much greater than my time. But at that point, that was very important for us to undertake.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're getting very much up against the time in which we will need to conclude this, and I know that there are some questions we haven't gotten to. I'm going to try to distill several of them into one general question, and it won't be adequate, and for that I do apologize, but maybe this will just mean we'll have to have another forum a little bit later some other time. But for both of you gentlemen, and I'll start with President Paino, I think, if I could, and then go to Mr. Monroe. How much, and I'm trying to bring this back to the educational element, I guess, to what degree in the education of our youth should professors, should administrators, should the ones charged with the education of youth bring their own political perspectives, particularly professors, into the teaching experience? Should they, in exercising their First Amendment rights, attempt to sway their students? Should they limit themselves to sort of adjust the facts and try to present a balance that would give the students more of a role in deciding? I mean, it's an interesting thing. We expect people who are professors, who are mentors, to share some of their philosophy, their perspective. We give them the academic freedom in which to do that, but where is the balance in that? And would we as a campus, this is, again, somebody you won't be that familiar with, would we invite a Rush Limbaugh to campus? Would we invite Students for a Democratic Society if they were still going on? I can't remember if they are or not. But do we want to bring those polar opposite viewpoints to campus? Or should we allow the teaching faculty to mostly share their perspectives, their views primarily?
Yeah, well, universities really need to be a place where there's a free exchange of ideas. And so I think that we need to invite the full spectrum of political ideology onto campus and listen respectfully and engage those who disagree with us. That's the ideal. It doesn't always work out that way. And certainly there's highly publicized cases on other campuses where speakers were invited and disinvited and the like. I think that sometimes we have to also be honest that there are certain speakers who are really just trying to inflame. I think as long as people are willing to come and have an honest intellectual debate, whether you're conservative or liberal, they should be invited and welcomed, and we should engage them. In terms of the professor's role, I don't think it's any secret in the 21st century. Probably most faculty certainly lean to the left. It's not exclusive. There are faculty who are conservative at Mary Washington and other public universities and private universities across the country. And I think there is a great concern, especially from those on the right, that there's an ideology that's being promoted on college campuses and certainly in the classrooms, that professors have a hard time checking their own political ideology and preferences at the door when they go into the classroom. My experience in dealing with faculty, and I have been a faculty member, I have been a dean, I've supervised faculty, I've been a chief academic officer, is that it is rare for a professor, regardless of political ideology, to bring that into their classroom and into their subject matter. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but it's rare that it happens. I don't think it should happen, but there is this concept of academic freedom, but academic freedom should only apply to the discipline in which that faculty member is studying and teaching, and not necessarily go off course and talk about something else that is their particular political view on a subject matter that's not related to the course matter. But, we're human, and I know it happens at times. I think it's unfortunate. But I can tell you that my experience is that whether college campuses lean left or whether they lean right is almost irrelevant in terms of the ideology of the students and what they form as they go through life, both as college students and afterward. Oftentimes, the student body will disagree very much politically with the faculty who are teaching them. Regardless of the faculty member's ideology, they might respect them for their scholarly interest and their ability to teach their discipline, but it doesn't necessarily that they buy into their political preferences, whatever they might be. But no, I don't think that's the role of a professor, is to bring their own political views and to try and espouse them into the classroom.
President Monroe, I'll give you a slightly different gradation of that, a little less focused on the academic experience. Leaders, elected leaders within a representative democracy, a republic such as ours, where is the balance between what a leader owes to his constituents in terms of reflecting their views, reflecting their passions, their fears, their concerns, versus the exercise of your own judgment in those cases where maybe that judgment differs from the popular voice of your constituents? I'm again trying to set up what you feel is the right balance between a leader's, or in this case we're saying a professor, but in this case a government leader's judgment and perhaps personal feelings versus what is perceived as the will of the people.
Well, can I relate to?
And certainly that too, yes.
Well, in my time, when I was a student at the College of William and Mary, remember again, we're in the throes of the revolution about to begin. At age 16, I was there in 1774. And by 1776, I was commissioned a lieutenant in the Continental Army. But before I left, remember that institutions of my time, higher institutions of learning, especially for young men, were all about preparing them to be citizens within the colony, to undertake responsible care, protection of the families, and well-being of the colony, and to bring them up as morally responsible young people. And one of those obligations of the university, especially at William & Mary, was to allow the students to participate in sitting in and listening to debates at the Virginia Assembly at the Capitol, and also in the taverns where the legislators would meet afterwards for meals and merriment. So a part of our learning was outside the classroom, so allowing us to listen to this ongoing dialogue that would lead to rebellion, but at the same time, when things got down to when the revolution was declared and our independence was going forward, many of those same professors at William & Mary were concerned about us focusing on our studies and not getting drawn into the conflict directly as soldiers, and many of us did leave for that reason. So there is a balance, and I respect everything that Dr. Paino said. I agree with him wholeheartedly on that. There is a delicate balance about bringing your own opinions in and also respecting others as well. And our times are not that different, because it sounds like in this particular instance, with the political climate of your time and with the climate of my time in the midst of war, they're not too dissimilar.
And so as a leader and facing both the demands of your populace that you represent and in your own judgment, how do you resolve conflicts when they appear between what you feel and what your constituents feel? Did you have to face that?
I do have to face that, and I think is that listening back to or embarking back to what I talked about in terms of listening to one's constituents and trying to get a feel for people's concerns and how you're going forward with your plan to address progress in terms of your goals of your country. You have to weigh those in, and so it's important to take those things into consideration. I was trying to think of an example. For one example, internal improvements in the United States in my day, I viewed this one example, try to get to the meat of the matter here. I felt that internal improvements could only be undertaken by constitutional amendment, that the authority of the United States was not such that it could undertake those things. And I urged Congress, especially, for example, the National Road, the Cumberland Road from Cumberland to Vandalia, Illinois, in the territory, when it was then a territory, be funded or administered by constitutional amendment. And the Congress disagreed with me and submitted a bill, and I vetoed that bill and wrote a very lengthy rationale for why we needed constitutional amendments. Again, perhaps I was not listening to my constituency, but I felt that in terms of interpretation of the Constitution and what calls for in terms of providing for national infrastructure, amendments are the way to go with that, and the Congress didn't agree with me on that. So sometimes you have to take the high road, and I thought I took the high road.
No pun intended. Well, we're still trying to solve the infrastructure debate and internal improvements. Ladies and gentlemen, we really have come to the end of our program far too soon, and I appreciate the participation of yourselves in helping provide some of the questions for this. We appreciate our online viewers. Hopefully, we're able to get through the buzzing phones and all the rest. And I hope you will please join me in thanking President James Monroe, as portrayed by Fredericksburg's own Jay Harrison.
Thank you. Thank you.
And President Troy Paino, as portrayed by himself. Thank you all very much, and good evening.